Let's now completely refactor our application that we have so far and create a lot of new files and a whole new file structure. So remember from the last video that we wanted to separate our routers into different files. And so that's going to be the first step that we will do here. So I'm going to create a new folder called routes now. And then in there, I will have one file for tour routes.js and then user routes.js as well. Okay, and so this is going to be the first time that we will really work with different modules, okay, and actually use them in a very meaningful way. So let's start with the tour router. Copy it here, then take this tour router here and put it here. And so next we need actually express here because we're using that variable. And so we need to import the express module. So express require express. Okay, it's kind of a convention to simply call this router and not tour router. So router, and now we will export the router and then import it into our main application. Okay? So remember how we do it when we only have one thing to export? Well, we use module.export and then put the router on there. Give it a save, and of course we still get some errors, but that's because the tour router is not defined in our main application file. Okay? Also, what's not defined in this file is all of these functions here. Okay, so let's very quickly get them and put them in the router file, at least for now. We will later create a new file for that as well. So it starts here. And careful not copying everything. Yeah, so just like this. And actually I'm going to put them before the routes. Give it a save. And so that should work now. And now do the same for the user. So get the router. And don't worry about all these errors that we're getting. Again, that's just because we are missing some variables in some places. So again, we need express here. Then we call this here just router. And then we export it. Okay, and now I'm also getting the handlers. Okay, so we can get rid of these route handlers now. Okay, and actually this one here is missing in our tour routes. So this piece of code where we actually read the tours from the JSON file. So put that right at the top here. And now finally we actually need to import the tour router and the user router so that these routes here continue to work. Okay, but that should be fairly easy. So let's do that. So the tour router is at require routes/tour routes. Okay, and we don't need the JS. And then the same for the user router. So tour routes, and actually it is here, the user routes. Now you might be wondering why I actually call the variables the user route, but then the file is user routes. And well, that's because this folder here is called routes. And so in there we have the tour routes into user routes. Okay, but what we actually export from that file is simply the router. All right, but I believe it makes more sense to actually call this folder here routes. Okay, and so that's why we have this small difference between routes and router. Now we still get some error here, and so fs is not defined. So let's take that, and actually we don't need it here. So let's put it in the tour routes. Right here, we get another error, and this time because this folder here is now not defined, because our dir name is now the routes. So we need to get out of that. So go up one folder, and then in there go into dev data, data, and tour simple. Now don't worry about getting all these errors. That's kind of normal when we are doing all this refactoring, because we're changing stuff all over the place. So it's normal that stuff breaks. Anyway, it's now back to working. And so we are now in a place where we can retest our routes here. And indeed, it works. The same for the users, let's suppose. And so everything is correct. So we have our routers now each in one different file, and we can say that each of them is one small sub-application. So one tour application and one user application. And we then put everything together in our global app file by importing these routers and then mounting the routers on the two different routes that we have currently implemented. Okay? So again, this is where we mount our routers. And I know that this concept can be a bit difficult to grasp, but don't worry about that. The longer you keep working on this project and the more code you keep writing, the clearer everything will automatically become. For now, the most important thing to keep in mind is that we created these different routers for each of the resources to have a nice separation of concern between these resources. So basically creating one small application for each of them and then putting everything together in one main app file, which is of course this one. So this app.js file that we have here is usually mainly used for middleware declarations. So we have all our middleware that we want to apply to all the routes. So in this case, we have these four middlewares here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. These middlewares we want to apply for all of the routes. And then for this route, we want to apply the tour router middleware. And for this route, we want to apply the user router middleware. Okay, so again, these two routers are actually middleware, which is why we can use app.use in order to mount them. Okay, and with that being said, let's take it one step further and actually remove these route handlers from the routes file. Okay, and so let's again create a new folder here, and this one will be called controllers. Okay, so I've been calling them route handlers, and so it would make sense to create a handlers folder. But later in this course, we will start using a software architecture called the model view controller. And in that architecture, these handler functions here are actually called controllers. And so that's why I'm going to call the folder and also the files in there controllers. So let's now create the tour controller.js and the user controller.js. Okay, and this will make a bit more sense once we reach the part of the course where we actually talk about the MVC or model view controller pattern. All right, so let's now take this code and put these handlers into the controller folder or file actually. So all of this code, it's the tour controller. Yeah, that's the one. Also, we need this fs module here, obviously at the top. Here we go. Now we want to actually export all of these functions from this module. So how do we do that? Well, in this case, we do not only have one export, so we're not going to use module.export, but instead we will put all of these functions on the exports object. Okay, and so let me select all of these consts so that I can actually replace them all at the same time. So exports dot delete tour and dot update tour, create tour, get tour, and get all tours. Okay, so that exports everything from this file, And so now let's go into the tour routes and simply import them. So const tour controller equals require. Okay, now we're in the routes folder here, right? So we need to move up one level and then go into controllers and into the tour controller.js. Okay, this is not correct. And all right. Now remember that when we export data from a file using the exports object, so just like we did here, when we then import everything into one object, then all of the data that was on exports is now going to be on tour controller. And so we will have tour controller.getAllTours, .createTours, .getTour, and really all of these. Okay, so this object here will be the equivalent of the exports that we have here. Remember that? And so it's really simple. All I have to do now is to create tour controller dot, and that's it. Now I could have also used the structuring, which I also showed you before. So just to demonstrate, I could have used it like this and then specified the exact same names that we have here. So get all tours and then create tour and all of these. And then I could have used them directly here without having to write tour controller and dot. Okay, but I actually like it like this, and I see no problem of having it like this. So it makes it nicely visible that all of these functions here actually come from this tour controller module. Okay, so I saved it now, and so it should keep working. So let's test that, and yeah, it does. So that's working now. Let's actually close it up, and now the same. Where is it? Here. Now the same, of course, with these functions. Put them here. And then export all these guys. So exports dot. Yeah, so that's correct. Now here we just import that module. And the same as before, we need to move up one level. We go into controllers and user controller. And now finally, just add it here. Give it a save and test it for this guy as well. And indeed, it works. So everything we did here was correct. So we're starting to have a bunch of files now. And so it's important to really get familiar where exactly all the different pieces of the application are located. Okay, so just to recap, the flow goes like this. We start receiving the request in the app.js file, right? It will then, depending on the route, enter one of the routers. So let's say the tour router, and then depending again on that route and of the request, it will then execute one of these controllers here. And so these are in the tour controller files. And that's where then finally the response gets sent and finishing the request response cycle. Okay, so we have now 3 files instead of having everything just in one file. All right, but that's still not the end of the story because I'm adding one more step here. So what I'm going to do is to create a server.js file as well. So server.js. And why am I doing that? Well, simply because it's a good practice to have everything that is related to Express in one file and then everything that is related to the server in another main file. So starting now, server.js will actually be our starting file where everything starts, and it's there where we listen to our server. So let's actually go ahead and copy or cut this part from here and move it into the server. Now, of course, this module here doesn't know about app, and so we need to import it. And to import it, we need to first export it. So we use module that exports, and we export our application from this file. Okay, and so now we have everything that is basically the application configuration in one standalone file. Okay, so back in the server, let's now import that. Require, and since it's our own module, we need to use this // to say that we're in the current folder, and here it's simply app. So simple as that. And later on we will actually have other stuff in this file that is not related to Express, but still related to our application. So stuff like database configurations, or some error handling stuff, or environment variables, all of that stuff will live in this server.js, which is kind of our entry point. Okay? So let's now finish the process that we have here, because now we do no longer run nodemon app.js, but instead we need to run server.js. Okay? And actually, since we're doing that, let me create an npm script for that. Closing that guy very quick. And so let me add here npm start nodemon server.js. Because this way I no longer have to really know which is the file that I actually want to run. So all I have to write is npm start, and there's no doubt that it's going to work. Otherwise, I might have to think, is it app.js or server.js, or what? What do I have to start here? But like this, I don't have to think. All I have to do is npm start, and it's gonna start. Okay? So just like this. And here we are back running our application. Close that guy. And by the way, this works even without having nodemon installed as our dev dependency, because I have nodemon installed globally. So we did that in the first section, and hopefully you did it there as well. If not, then go ahead and in another tab do npm install nodemon. So if for some reason you skip that section, you type npm install nodemon, and then you can either install it globally, like this, or you can install it as a dev dependency, like this. All right? So just make sure that you have nodemon installed, no matter if it's globally or as a dev dependency, okay, in order to make this work. So, final check, just to make sure, and on this one, and yeah, indeed, we have our app correctly refactored. So, these were a lot of changes in one video alone, so after you finish this one, please go ahead and analyze everything that we did, and really try to trace the path that a request will do inside of our app from start to finish. This way you will really get a feeling of how everything here works. And I see you after doing that in the next video.